coaching for, right around, I would say close to like 5-6 years now. Was fortunate enough to spend a lot of time listening and getting mentored by Spellman and his crew. Spent some time down in London with Jonas Dodu and Speedworks Training, Alan Murdoch, Dan Path. Just I think like 3, 4, 5 years ago, I spent a lot of my time just feeding my brain certain things. I felt that speed development was always something that I never spent enough time on. I was always that kind of athlete that anything I was doing, if I was practicing, was either on the ball or conditioning was just seen as this like, you hated conditioning because you were going to do something that was not related to the sport and probably not putting you in a good position just to fucking wear yourself out. But yeah, man, been with McLloyd, honestly. So was coaching really through COVID. That's when all my like training really picked up. Spent a lot of time doing house calls, getting out to people's, houses. And, like I said, at that time, feeding my brain with a lot of the speed stuff and was just really putting that into play with all the work that I had in. Got an opportunity to, spend some time, like I said, down there with Spellman, and he was using McLloyd Sport. And at the time, I saw not necessarily a need, but no one was using GPS in my area, or even any kind of speed training tools, any kind of tech, timing gates, VBT, none of that. So we kind of decided to bring it in. Very new. I mean, my background was in. Hold on, give me 1 second. I'm gonna close this. It's loud as shit. My background in in school was really just business development, nothing related to sports specifically or training in that sense. And just really brought on the system, not knowing much about it, spent a lot of time just on the groundwork, out with teams, started getting into consulting, just saw the need for speed development and the right coach cueing the right things and spend the right time with athletes. And, I was fortunate enough to get some people around me that backed me up in my beliefs, and been with McLloyd now for 2 years, and yeah, man, just been rocking ever since. Getting an opportunity to connect with coaches daily, network, spend time all over the world, testing people's speeds. That's what I do.
Because they try to kick people like me and you down, right? And that's fighting the good fight at the end of the day. And when you start to introduce things like GPS tracking and data keeping and all these things, that to me is a fundamental way to go about progressing athletes. And we use Freelap over here. We've been offered kind of some GPS tracking. The issue I have with GPS tracking is what metrics do you go by? Are you only trying to hit top speed? Like, okay.
Yeah. So we'll pull, obviously top speed is appealing, right? You saw the draft. Everyone's throwing miles per hour out there on the gauntlet, on the 40s. So it's becoming more relevant. When it comes to training, I think it's a good indicator of like where an athlete can start off as, and then obviously we build from there, right? One of the things I learned from Jonas Dodu was always a short to long progression with any individual group, whatever it is that you're working with. But to piggyback off of that, what we'll do is we'll track athletes on the GPS. From there, we can pull the raw data. We pour that data into our athlete management system called One Tool, where we get a full sprint velocity, force velocity profile from those athletes, right? So then we get into more of the force output, power output, how long it takes an athlete to hit their top speed, what we even get 10-yard splits, 20-yard splits. We really like I personally like to look at distance covered per second, right? If you have an athlete that covers maybe 8 feet in 1 second, or an athlete that covers 11 feet in 1 second, well, we know which one's a better accelerator, right? So we definitely don't just pull top speed. I think that's just, obviously a marker that we look to improve and get better at. And it's a good starting point. The kids love it because, I mean, everyone's talking about 20-mile-an-hour club and 18-mile-an-hour club for girls. And but yeah, short answer, definitely no. We definitely get a lot deeper into the, backside of And then obviously you got the kinematics, right? The breakdowns of how an athlete moves. And I think a lot of times, like a lot of athletes are very much so visual learners. So if we just, for me, if I tell you, lift from the hip and strike down, I know what that means and I know what I see. But for an athlete that has never seen it, felt it, heard it, they're just like, okay. Like, I always tell kids, especially like anytime I get a chance to work with a college athlete, I work with a lot of women's soccer. They come in, they get a training session with me and they're like, dude, I just learned so much. Like, and I'm so confused. And it's like, that's good.
Yeah,
like,
you should be confused at this point because people have been teaching the wrong things for such a long time. And
yeah,
you know you're great when you can take 5 minutes out of an athlete's time and completely change how they view what they've been doing for the last 5 years.
Exactly. And I always tell kids, I'm like, think about it. Like you're 20 years old, you've developed 20 years of certain movement patterns that you've just gotten accustomed to based off of what you just know, right? And it's like now I'm telling you to do everything completely different. Like it's going to take a long time, and it's not just going to be that one training session with me. I always tell people like you need to take concepts and learn to apply them in your setting, right? Because now that you understand the concept of projection and the concept of attacking back, well, every time you step on that soccer field and your warm up and your prep in any scenario, you need to be keeping that in the back of your head, right? And then it's just ingraining movement patterns over time, and eventually you get there.
How are you tracking the 10-yard splits with the McLloyd?
Can I share my screen?
Just you showing this shows me that, people don't become confident by shouting stuff into the mirror, but by having an undeniable stack of proof that they are who they say they are, right? And, when you come in here and have this proof, it's really, this is what we want. And there is the need for this.
Yeah. So basically what we're looking at here, this is exported data from our GPS, right? So what we're looking at right here these are essentially sprints that you can see. This is in the raw data from the GPS. And then we'll get like a little breakdown on distance covered in certain speed zones, time spent in certain acceleration zones, sprints that were done. Typically we'll look at sprints above 10 miles an hour, duration of the session, distance, either in miles, kilometers, meters, yards. We'll get a top speed on the day, and then we'll actually be able to come into here and look at every single sprint that was done in that session, right? So if I want to look at this 20 mile an hour sprint from this athlete, so what we actually get here, right, is we get a top speed, right? We get a total distance. This is just, it'll stop detecting after an athlete gets below 75% of his top speed. And then what we can actually see here is, this is where I was telling you, like we look at feet per second, right? So I like to look at and see how much distance do we cover in 1 second. So right now we can see this athlete covers 9.33 feet in 1 second. He covers 20 feet in 2 seconds, 24 feet from 2 to 3 seconds. So we look to try to improve these certain numbers, because obviously for me, it's keeping it simple. If I can just get you to cover more ground in less time, we're gonna run faster. We're gonna be more efficient. And then we'll actually pull. This is where we get our 0 to 10 splits, 0 to 20 splits, and this is all, shout out Nick Priest. This is his system. This is not mine. He basically just was able to he was able to take JB Marin's algorithm and put it into his thing, right? Okay. So this is all it is. You don't have to spend hours throwing in split times for one athlete, and then it's just upload, boom, and it's all here, right? Now what we actually see is an increase in speed over time, right? So now we're looking at step by step, millisecond by millisecond, what the increase in velocity over distance is. So what we're looking at is an athlete's increase in velocity over time over distance. So the 0.6 that you're looking at, that's the seconds, right? So 0.7 seconds, literally 0.8 seconds. And then the dark blue you see is the yards. And then the light blue at the bottom is speed. So what we actually then look at too is like, now not only for him, it took him 33 yards to hit 20 miles an hour, right? And 4.7 seconds. Well, a big indicator of that is, what did everything before those 33 yards look like, right? And what we can see in this graph is there's a lot of spikes, meaning he jumps up to 13.4, drops down to 11, picks it back up to 13.7, right? So he doesn't have a smooth gradual buildup in his acceleration. I really like to look at like 10 yards. How fast were you at 10 yards? 15.96. Okay, well, how fast were you at 20 yards? 17.34, right? So he didn't have too big of a jump from 10 to 20. So for me, that tells me we'd be better off working on that transition 10 to 20, probably working, I mean, we'll do some load velocity profiling where we'll take like 75, 50, 25% VDEC, and then that can help me understand like how much load we can put on the athlete when we're there. But for this guy, it was a lot of technical work. Like it's technical, physical, and it's like, this is one side of things. But I think when you have this, and then you overlay video analysis, and then you've cued in the technical enough to where now the athlete understands, we're speaking the same language.
Yeah.
It all comes together. But so that's pretty much how we have our split times here from this graph. So 1.92, 10 yards, 3.13, 20 yard, 4.26, 30, 40 here.
Obviously, the faster athletes take the longer to reach top speed. But what are you seeing kind of the indicator of the marker in which people are reaching their top speed?
So my bad. I want to show you one more thing.
Yeah, right.
Then we'll get into force output, right? So now from that sprint, we can pull force output, which is typically happening in your 0 step, in your initial push. How much force can you produce in that initial push off the line? Power max typically comes in your first step. So we're looking at how much power can you produce in that first step, hidden back into the ground behind you. And then RF and DRF are more related towards like top end speed and those kind of things, right? But your question was,
where are you seeing on average for your specific athletes where they're hitting top speed? Is it that 30-yard mark?
Honestly, I would say typically for the most part between 25 and 35 is like a sweet spot.
Right.
From what I've seen.
Yeah.
For my field sport athletes, I want you to hit your top speed sooner, like depending if you're like a winger position on like the soccer field, then you're going to be acquiring a lot of high speed yardage. You might need to have a little bit of a different approach with like what we decide to do with you. But for the most part, like soccer athletes, I want you to be able to have a great acceleration because it's all, I mean, in general, basketball, right. Soccer, it's all about separation. So I can teach you just in itself displacement, right, and projection in your first step, whether it's lateral, linear, you're going to win more balls. You're going to be that much more efficient, right? So,
and I don't want people to get this confused, right? Because from what I'm assuming, we're always trying to make things simple, right? Simple, just don't overcomplicate simple things. And when people see that much data, they're like, oh my God, but it's not that complicated. It is simply tracking what the hell they're doing over the course of their entire training period and just keeping it. And, as a performance coach, you're just evaluating the numbers. It has nothing to do with complicating certain aspects of a workout or, projecting 5 months out. It's really just keeping the data, evaluating the data, and adjusting the training necessary.
Exactly. And the kids never see these graphs.
Good. I mean,
they don't need to, because I mean, and you've coached every athlete learns differently, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Like some athletes will do good with it. Some athletes will be super overwhelmed. So I think every individual is so different in the way that they do everything, which is
I mean, at least what we do for our practices, we rank, record, and publish. Mm-hmm. But we don't have these kind of elaborate graphs to where their mind's going to be turning. It's just simply, what did you run that day, and at least they can see that. Why did I have a bad day? What did I run 3 months ago on this day? But those graphs are super interesting to me.
Yeah, and the cool thing with like fortunately, I've been working with a lot of teams recently, right? And the biggest pain point is like allowing a performance coach or a speed coach to take an hour or like one training session or two out of the week, right? Like it's not happening. So then it comes down to that little bit of different conversation on, well, how can you start to implement certain kinds of high speed running by just switching the dimensions of the field that you're playing with, right? For example, for soccer, if you're going to run a small sided game and you're going to do, maybe a 20 by 20, well, what happens if you decide to do 40 by 20, right? And maybe you have two wingers that play the field down this way, so you're manipulating training sessions. We're always banking on athletes hitting their top speed in games. Rarely does it happen.
Right.
So then it's like finding that right point, maybe typically like after a dynamic warm up with a good activation that you could just expose some athletes to some top end speed runs for the ones that need it, the ones that hit that, they say 95%, 90%, whatever you want to go with. But the ones that hit that in games, that's when we start to make those adjustments because we have that GPS data to be able to say, hey, look, you just hit it yesterday in a game or 2 days ago in a game. You don't need to get it today, right?
Yep.
But maybe there's those athletes that never get that exposure. Maybe they're coming off the bench. Maybe they're playing in the midfield. Maybe so many different scenarios, right? But the cool thing with the McLloyd system is that it's all real-time data. So like the kids really feed off of that instant feedback, like the free lap system where they run through the the beacons and it tells you their times right away and you tell them and they're competing, right? So same with miles per hour. It's like I can give them that feedback after every single sprint. They know now when I say, hey, we're doing these tempo runs at 75%. Well, I know you're an 18 mile an hour guy. 75% of that is such and such, right? So now we're not just throwing numbers or percentages out there without having, a true idea behind what that actually is.
How often are you hooking them up to the McLloyd?
Every day.
Every day.
Ideally, in a team setting, every day.
Okay.
For my like private athletes that I train with, I like to send them home with GPS. That way I can get a better gauge on what their days look like. Like I got one kid right now, baseball, competes in track, and then does 7-on-7 on the weekends. So it's like, you're doing a lot. I mean, we've been training forever. So just by having that little bit of support where I can say, hey, look, last week compared to this week was this kind of drop. We can make adjustments into what we decide to do in the gym, but ideally it makes sense when you have the data daily. For a lot of the clubs and teams that I just maybe come out and test, it'll just be more of like a testing thing where, we'll come out, test, provide a little bit of consulting on like how you can start to, work in some resisted running to get your athletes faster. And then we'll come out and retest, see if it worked. And then kind of fall into that sort of, flow of things.